Hello, everyone. All right, get myself in gallery here. All right, so I'm going to share, Judy, if you don't mind, I think I'll probably just share the presentation because I think your audio stays better when you don't share. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Bear with me for 1 second here while I get there. All right, so okay. I'm going to go ahead and put us into slide mode. All right, Miss Judy. Does anyone have any questions about, let's start with G1. And while I do that, let me see who's in the room and who I can assign as a note taker.
Hey, Karina, I'm here. Megan,
Awesome.
I'm
Thank you, Megan. Okay, so you can be in Miro taking the notes for us. All right, thank you.
Deanna? Oh, bummer. I thought Deanna got assigned that job.
She might be in another room.
She's here. I'm looking at her.
Oh, she's out the hook tonight. All right.
Fine. That's fine. I like listening. I'm good.
Oh, wait, hold on. Dana needs to be in one, so maybe I'm gonna have to move. Hold on.
And so close and yet so far.
You're supposed to be in Willamette, so I'll actually move myself to Willamette. Sorry, guys.
All right. Sorry, y'all. So Dana, you will be our note taker today. All right, Harmony, what questions do you have?
In either G1 or G2, where do creative science opt-out lead to at middle school?
Creative science opt-out is to Clark K5 and Harrison Park Middle.
Thanks.
Okay.
We'll say, actually, let me test that with anyone who was part of the generating team. It's, as far as I know, it's consistent to what it's been. There wasn't anything that I saw that changed it in G from what was in previous discussion.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions about either G1 or G2? Dana, we are in, our room is Clackamas.
I'll ask another question.
Yeah. All right.
Do we have, can we see, I imagine it's not immediately available, but I'm interested in the changes to the, like the demographics in terms of socioeconomic status at the middle schools in G1 and G2, thinking about how the economic diversity changes in addition to how the populations of historically underserved, particularly thinking about like the future of Title I status at Kellogg or Harrison Park or Lane, and that, you know, I think Lane is fairly similar in terms of feeders compared to F3, but I think those are other factors that need to play into any kind of comparison about how these schools are going to change demographically. Thanks, Judy.
Right. And you want me to try and share?
Yeah. Your voice, you're already a little crackly. I don't.
Miro board.
It's the Miro board. All right, close out of the Miro board.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see if that gets better.
Okay.
And then certainly if you want to, are you planning on sharing like the dashboard or something? Is that what you want to share? Because I can stop sharing.
And I don't think I can.
I got it. Okay, I can see it.
Or I put the link in.
Yep.
If you want to share it.
I got it. I think people should be seeing it now on my screen.
Okay.
Okay.
So if people just want to take a moment to find the middle schools, starting with Harrison Park on row 17. And keep in mind, again, this assumes all of the neighborhood students, which is about 100 students. I don't know the exact demographic breakdown of those
Can't
kids.
hear you. You keep breaking up constantly.
Maybe turn your video off, Judy. It sometimes helps.
Could I ask if we're gonna look at this spreadsheet and compare the middle schools, can we highlight them all simultaneously? Just to help with, like,
Yes, I will. Judy can be doing that in the background. Chris has had her hand up. There you go.
Thank you.
Chris.
Thank you. I just want to follow up a little bit on what was just said about the Title I status. One of my hopes is that we won't make things worse for the targeted populations, our Black and Native students. And I don't know, that sounds a little simplified, but if we think about particularly at Lane and Harrison Park, who are, I think I'm not looking at the numbers right now, but last time I looked, they were all a little bit over where they would need to be for Title I. And I guess I would just encourage us to, in our statement of, what we want, to strongly say, please let us not diminish the services we've been providing for those students in their Title I entities as they've been in the past, because I am hearing, at least from our Lane principal, that the addition of numbers and the benefits that will bring will not, it's not a direct, it doesn't directly make up for the loss of the Title I students. It doesn't, the impact on them will be more negative. So I just want to encourage us to consider doing that for both Lane and Harrison Park. Ask the district to continue to offer those students what they have needed and have been getting.
Thank you, Chris. Angelica?
Yeah, I think it's a technical question, I'm hoping. I'm looking at the building capacity numbers, and I noticed this when the information was sent out earlier. So, and I can only speak to Creston. I don't know the building capacities of any other schools, but our building capacity is only like 370, and all of a sudden here it says 558. Like, what? I have no idea. I could. There's nowhere I could put 558 kids. So I'm really curious, like, where that number came from and when that changed. For a long time, when we were having these meetings last year, it was listed at like 370-ish. I can't remember the exact number. So what happened?
Crescent capacity includes the annex. I have asked many times for it to be removed. So
oh, okay, yeah, because Head Start is not. We don't have
Right.
any classrooms in the Head Start annex.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, maybe we can just get that fixed, because the percent utilization is completely inaccurate then.
Correct.
Thank you.
Adrielle.
So Title I have a question about that. So if we're shifting neighborhood students, and like Lent has like 100 and some odd students that are African-American, let's say, right? So if their SES is this, I mean, if it doesn't change, would shifting students with low SES make it harder for Marysville to have a, I mean, I'm just using this as an example, to have a, be eligible for Title I. And so if we're looking at shifting and then those kids going to Lane or Harrison Park, wouldn't they still be able to maintain their Title I? Like, I guess I'm just trying to figure out how Lane and Harrison Park would lose their Title I if the schools that are feeding into them and the students are coming from neighborhood, which is predominantly low SES. Right? Like,
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure that out, because I do hear what Chris is saying. I'm trying to figure out, it's not making sense to me. So maybe I'm just unclear.
So I think poor Judy's trying to maybe Judy, you can try and bring your voice into the room, but Title I eligibility is influenced by many factors. So we can't accurately predict the impact of those changes on Title I status, right? So it is primarily an SES, but there are other factors that impact it as well.
Okay.
And I mean, we provide the information so we can be aware of it, you can be aware of it. We want to be thoughtful about it. Certainly when there is big shifts, in a school population that will happen over time as these things become fully implemented. But there are so many other factors at play. We have control over where we draw the line for Title I. We don't have control over which kids will show up next year from the neighborhood or from the boundary change parts.
Got you.
So there's just a lot more to it. This is not a model for predicting accurately Title I. And just keep that in mind as you're looking at these potential percentages.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Any questions? Chris, I see your hand up again.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that, and I don't know if this is helpful, and I understand that Title I is a complicated description, but when you increase your numbers, you don't lose necessarily those high need kids. You just have more kids that may or may not increase your number of high need kids, but you still have those high need kids that are there that still need the services that might be disappearing because there are now just more kids.
So it's a dilution, but again, not adequate. Can't accurately sort of predict the Title I status, because not only will it change as you shift demographics, right, in terms of this transition, but it'll switch year to year. It could potentially
Absolutely.
switch year to year.
But yes, dilution is a good way of describing it. Although in a way it's a little bit like the children don't dissolve into that bigger hole.
Right.
Because it's like the salad bowl and the melting pot, you know, the children don't melt. They stay their salad. There's just more tomatoes in the salad, but more lettuce. I don't know. Anyway.
You still got the croutons in there, which to me are the best part. All right, Harmony.
Yes, I understand the flexibility of, and I think especially in considering where you're shifting Atkinson neighborhood, like which middle school it goes to, coming from that more affluent group of students could have an impact, right, on certainly Harrison Park or Kellogg. But then I think I'm also interested in just comparing across how we're balancing socioeconomic status. Say we aren't concentrating diversity in one school or another, that we're not concentrating wealth in one school or another. So I think just in looking forward to look at the metrics that we're also comparing across scenarios, looking at how SES is balanced between different schools and how demographics are balanced is really what I'm after.
Yeah, and I think, Harmony, as we start to look across both the G series and then in the future, the G and the F series, right? I think that's noted, right? That as we present those, we need to look at the racial equity impact measures for each of those, and then have kind of as best as we can, a conversation about the socioeconomic impact or SES status impact as well. I'm going to switch us to G2. Oh, maybe if I click on it. So you can start, oh, and she's already highlighted them. Always one step ahead. Thank you, Judy. Thought I saw a hand up. Eddie, was your hand up a second ago? Did you put it back down? Okay.
I was gonna, I want to address what Harmony was talking about first before I raise my issue, but I was gonna ask for maybe at some point raising the maps, just
Sure.
so we can,
Bringing those back up.
not right now, just after this. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. So anything to note here, side by side? Judy, anything that you'd want to call out in these?
I think you still have G1 up.
Oh.
You should be seeing blue highlight for G2. Link not copied over well. Okay.
I think you may have copied over the G1 again. Or at least that's the one I keep clicking on. Okay, let me try that. Aha.
No.
For some reason, it's not liking that. Okay, I don't know. Okay. let's try
It
this.
just, this is really
There we
unusual.
go, blue,
Okay.
got him. Okay. And so if people just want to look, kind of toggle between the two of these, you can just toggle between the latest two links. And maybe in the absence of that, I'm going to get us back to the maps. Just that way we can start having conversations about any other questions relative to boundaries, streets, things of that nature. Okay, Eddie.
Oh, I guess it's quiet for a little bit. So, yeah, just to clarify, I think G2 is where we shift the Atkinson neighborhood, or we keep it at Mount Tabor. And then I think the idea for that is that the advantage is that it kind of eases the enrollment at Kellogg. And then, oh yeah, the other big thing was also that even though Tabor is over enrolled, it's kind of at the northern boundary of the SEGC work, so that if it becomes a problem, there's at least potential for it to be fixed in the next round when they're balancing northeast. But having it, I guess having it go to Kellogg instead, it's kind of boxed in that area, so that it would be less flexible in terms of the future and changing. I think that was the thinking behind why the shift in Atkinson. Sorry, I just want to clarify that and maybe see what people think.
Yeah, anyone have concerns or questions about the boundary differences between G1 and G2? All right. Anything else? Any questions about kind of the primary drivers or the feeder pattern changes for Atkinson between G1 and G2? Harmony. Sorry, I just looked up.
That's not very many of us. For
Yeah. It's all right.
I think one other thing that I was noting when I was looking at the summary statistics is that, and this is probably just commentary is that the K-5s are the only one that appears to be like significantly below the 270 mark is Glencoe, which again, higher SES and then on the edges, right? As opposed to having schools anywhere in the middle.
Are you comparing G1 to G2?
I'm just in general. I think both do. I think G2 does a better job of it. What it looks like in terms of balancing elementary enrollment.
Good point.
Right. We talked a lot about middle school enrollment, but like
thinking about the elementary schools,
keeping them as as close to 270 and higher than 270 ideally. G2 seems to do a better job than G1.
Thank you. All right, Chris, and then you, Elizabeth.
This isn't the place I'm most familiar with. So I would love to hear people who know the areas kind of make a, state their, I like this one because, or I like that one because. That would be super helpful if folks have opinions.
Yeah, that's true. For those of you that aren't familiar with the area, I think they could certainly use some direct input from those of you that are familiar with the area. So that way, maybe they can make an informed vote. Elizabeth.
So this relates to that a little bit, Chris. When we talked about the numbers for Glencoe, I think that one of the rationales was that there's a higher tolerance for lower numbers at Glencoe because of the high SES status of the school. It could withstand that a little bit. It could absorb that differential a little bit more. So there's a bit more tolerance for it. So one question I would love to hear is, if we have time to ask Judy or someone from PPS to really walk us through the racial equity impact slides, like number 22 and 23 in the presentation, and really hear from PPS staff their analysis of those impacts.
I'd like to also encourage, if we're going to talk about racial equity, and I think this is where Lent was fitting in, is also any community members as well that feel like they themselves would be impacted if they're identifying as somebody of the BIPOC community. And if I may, Chris, what are you looking for when you're asking about, like, what do you like, what do you don't like? Like, what are you seeking in that question? I was just curious, like, I like this local community, like local businesses, or what are you trying to gather there, if I may ask?
Certainly, I'm trying to gather whether the boundaries, I've heard people say these boundaries, they follow main roads better. I heard people talk about the benefits of rectangles. And I'm not opposed to rectangles or, making main roads as boundaries, but I guess what someone said earlier, which of these really, and even, looking at the slide we went back to, the differences seem to be really small between the two. And so I'm which one of these meets our goals better? I mean, it's a persuasive idea that the Glencoe folks could maybe handle a smaller number. I mean, that's a helpful idea to me. So which one of these meets our goals? Or if they're both equally good, I don't know.
Yeah, so we can certainly go through, I think one of the requests was to kind of go through the racial equity impact measures, right? So typically, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Judy, please, but typically what we want to see is the blue and the yellow, the higher the upper percentage, the better. And then in the purple, it's the opposite, right? You want to see the numbers lower. That's right, Judy? Or
That's right.
okay. And so if we're just looking at the G1, right? So we go essentially 74, 74, and 75 for the percentage of middle school students with schools greater than that 500. In G2, it's a little bit lower than that, right? So we're at 72, 64, and 69, roughly 65 and 69. Similarly, at the elementary school level, G1 has most of them in the 92, 93 category, and a greater range, but certainly 92, your Black and Native students at 95, and your English language learners at 97. And then the percentage that with over 80% utilization, the impacted communities are at 13% and 22% in G1 and 10% and 20% in G2. So I think, Harmony, that's where you were talking about, at least in terms of these metrics. To get to your point, Chris, G2 appears to do a better job for the elementary schools and for the utilization rate writ large, and slightly less so at the middle school level, right?
I do want to point out really quick, sorry, just to also add to that. The reason G2 of the middle school is a little lower is because Kellogg is slightly under 500 to start with. And then the projection into 2025 is that it goes over upper 500s. So that's kind of why those numbers of the middle school are lower at G2.
Okay, yeah, because these are basically the comparison of 2025 to the baseline of the current year, 21-22. Harmony, I'm going to go to Adrielle just because we haven't heard from her, and then I'll come back to you. Yep.
Can we define? I think maybe I might be the only one. When we talk about the racial equity impacts, what is that? Like, what is the definition of it? Because I know we're talking about numbers and the number of students, but when we're talking about the impact, are we talking about the number of students that are moving, that have resources, that are, I mean, what is that term? What does it define?
So Adriel, we can pull up the definition. I think we brought these around in September.
Okay.
To have a high level, small set of variables that can be compared from proposal to proposal. They're not meant to tell a whole story, but to bring visibility to some key impacts. And because we have defined these key impacts of having schools above a minimum threshold, 500 or 270, and having school and avoiding overcrowding, that's why you see these measures on here. And we have all students, but then we spotlighted the Black and Native American students who would be affected if all these changes were in place today, as well as English language learners. There are many other metrics that could be brought in. These are the ones that we had selected for, again, it's just a high level diagnostic. And then we also have the number of students who would be impacted, who would be at a different school.
So who would move?
Yes, who would attend a different school if every one of these changes was 100% in place today.
Right. And what you see in terms of at least the number of students that are moving, if you're looking at Black and Native students and English language learners, they are relatively close to the same number in both of the G scenarios. There are in G1 more students overall affected by about 130 than in G2. Okay, Harmony, and then you might, Adriel, did we answer your question?
I think for me, I was looking at this slide. I've always looked at it differently. So I think it might be a conversation for another time.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not looking for like what the actual, it's
yeah, so not the metrics of like what 500 is, but
yeah,
that's
but
so
like
why choose that number, right? Is that what you're trying to get at, Adriel?
so like if we're saying there's an impact of racial equity, are we saying that African American and Native students are less likely to have ELL supports? Like what is the impact? I guess that's what I'm saying. What are those impacts? What is
Okay. So the impact is access to robust programming, a full range of electives, social, emotional, and other supports that would be in place that are more likely to be in place if a school is enrolled above these minimums.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've been looking at this and I may or may not be the only one. And I've never asked that question. And I think I've been looking at this slide completely wrong the entire time we've been doing it. So, and I'm in meetings and I just never thought to ask. I made an assumption that I knew what it meant.
Yeah, so I think that's, and Judy's right that this was presented back in September and then we kind of never went back to it, right? But essentially the numbers, so by saying if you have a percentage of middle school students in schools over 50% or over 500, sorry, saying Black and Native students, there's 64.7% of Black and Native students in middle schools will have access to those greater resources, those greater supports. That's kind of what we're getting at.
I apologize if I'm taking away time.
No. That's good clarity. Okay, Harmony, then Maria.
I think just to add to that a little bit, so dollars follow numbers, right? The way I sat on the budget committee for 6 years with PPS, so dollars or the number of students is what determines on the whole how much staffing that school gets. So how many FTE, how many counselors, how many administrators, how many teachers, which follows into programming, right? Number of electives, all of those things.
With some caveats, but yes.
So the reason I keep asking about like demographic changes and socioeconomic status is because the other components of that funding that determine robust funding are demographic, right? There's a ratio FTE that is given depending on the number of historically underserved students and the percentage of historically underserved. the percentage of direct certification. There is also Title I funding as a separate, and then the district has also set aside that is like non-formula FTE that they apply to schools too. So I think this is part of the picture, right? Like straight numbers is part of the picture, but without the demographics and the comparison of the demographics, we don't see those, like how those additional, the caveat supports change. That's not actually why I raised my hand. I was just saying, so Atkinson's the one that's moved around all over the place in G1 and G2. I'm happy to comment. In general, I don't have a strong opinion about where our community feels because we have had no time to bring this to them to say. I will say, like, certainly safe routes to schools and main roads have been a key component. 71st in G2 is probably the only main road east of 67th in South Tabor. So it's probably the most, that probably makes sense as a dividing line. It's a big thoroughfare from Howell to Division, so that probably makes sense. The other lines, I don't know. I mean, I think as with every school that's facing boundary changes, they're all disruptions and people on the line or across the line.
Sure. You're always going to be one neighborhood
about the move.
Right. You're always going to be disruptive.
So, yeah, I think the concern has always been, at least for our community, like a safe route to school and whatever that looks like, and then ensuring robust enrollment at the K-5 level so we have stable staffing, right? Like we're losing 2 teachers this year, so we'll have a single strand, which we've been trying to avoid this whole time. And so trying to like create a system in which schools aren't facing that instability moving forward has always been key. So I think for us, like, if we get to that 270 in the neighborhood side and ensure, like, 2 strands of neighborhood and robust programming, that's the goal. And I think that's the goal for a lot of the K-5.
Yep. Maria.
Thank you so much. I just have some nuanced questions also. If we could, if I may I, can we go back to the racial equity impact?
Yeah.
This is awesome. And my nuanced questions, I guess, would be the following about, because we know that when it comes to racial equity impact, that it also means about looking at our staff and how it kind of reflects with our student population. And so how was that played into these particular ratios, if somebody has that particular question? And then number 2, when I think about our positive adult role models in our buildings, and I think about currently like Spanish DLI programs, for example, it really then brings in really great staff that brings in that bicultural experience and even bilingual experience and lived experience, which is also kind of a great asset for our team. So I was just curious how those 2 things, which are really focused on staff and reflecting student body, how was that a part of this racial equity impact, or can you please review that?
Julie, can you try and speak
staff are not factor in this. It's a great question and a great point. And I also want to say that the racial equity impact measures, these high level sort of minimal diagnostics, were meant to be used in conjunction with listening and understanding and believing the families who would be most impacted. They're not meant to take the place of listening and understanding. They're meant as a diagnostic to go a long way.
Yeah, it's like a quick dashboard, right? And Maria, one of the things that we heard very early on and consistently is that, right? Especially from impacted communities. Again, less of a concern about which scheme, but rather ensure that my kids of color, whether they're Black, Brown, or Native, and are emerging bilinguals, have access to resources, have people that look like them, that speak their language as trusted resources in their schools, that they can stay connected with their siblings and with their neighborhood walking to school. Those are elements that we've heard consistently. from the impacted communities that we've talked to all through listening and learning. So definitely something that we've talked about with this group, but not something that necessarily impacts the racial equity impact measures that are outlined here, if that makes sense, Maria.
Are there other slides then that maybe spoke about that piece a little bit more, or?
There were in previous sessions, unless Judy, you can think of something that you can pull up off the top of your head.
No, I do want to say that the one thing that was emphasized, shared both by principals and district staff, is that the staffing for Kellogg Middle School to support Spanish immersion was a unique opportunity to staff a new school that is likely to not be replicated if the program is moved to an existing school. That the way we staff in Portland Public it provides different opportunities if it's a brand new school than if you're merging with an existing school. And so the staff that's there, how they were put together, how it supports beyond classroom teachers was shared multiple times by principals and others. That's an example of staffing that that has come up. I also know that we've had other discussions, and Adriel, you might want to speak to this too, about the importance of, as Karina said, family students saying like it's important to have staff that look like me, that can understand and my perspective,
My lived experience.
my lived experience.
And I think to your point, like if we were to include that, I think then that we would probably have a significant shift in some of those percentages, because there aren't, I mean, you know, there's 0.7% in the state of African American teachers in general, right? So where you have a heavy BIPOC representation on some campuses, it's Latino, not BIPOC across all races, but just Latino. So it's kind of skewed. And so where at Kellogg, there's a huge social justice representation for Latin students, there's none for African American students, right? Whereas if you look at like and let's just not talk about dual language, a Woodlawn, where there's a huge I'm sorry, let me back that up. There is a representation of African American and Latino. It might be sort of equitable in terms of the number of students and the number of teachers to support students from different cultures. So if we included that, it would not tell us a very transparent story.
Yeah, I mean, the long and the short of it is that that's a complicated story, right? Because it is about, and FTE move from year to year, right? You'll shift from school to school, but that is one thing that was stated about the intentionality of staffing Kellogg to support the Latinx families that came as a part of that Spanish DLI program. To your point, Adriel, that doesn't necessarily impact the other BIPOC communities, but does impact the English language learners primarily of Latino descent. Okay, Elizabeth. We've got about 3 more minutes before they're going to yank us back through the portal.
Okay, I'll be super fast. I really appreciate that. No, because Eddie wants to talk also. So, but I appreciate that Maria brought this up. And I think, you know, one of the things we talked about was the limitations of this process, which is we're looking predominantly at geographic movements. And our task is to provide excellent support services across the elementary schools, but we're only looking at geography and who's going where and boundaries. And there is so much more to this conversation about providing excellent services that we have no control over. And I want to just elevate what Maria said, and also because I think that's got to be a really important part of whatever we recommend, whatever scenarios, that this is one piece of a really important puzzle. And ensuring that we are doing the best we can to recruit, retain, and support teachers of color, providing curriculum that support learning across cultures, I mean, all of these things that we know we have to do to support students. Because this is just this is a piece of what we're trying to do for students.
Yeah, completely agree. Eddie?
Yeah, I have a main point, but before I get to that, I think I just want to kind of throw out there that it can be possibly short-sighted to just kind of base a lot of things just on staffing. I mean, before I go there, I just want to say I'm not really convinced about G yet. You know, I still lean towards the F. But the thing is, like, you know, the principal at Harrison Park said that, you know, because they're converting to middle school, they're going to have, you know, half their staff has to be hired, so that offers an opportunity to also, you know, staff accordingly. And also, you know, the average like attrition for teachers these days, especially in Portland Public, is like 3 to 5 years. So it's tough to make a judgment based on just current staffing, and potentially short-sighted. You know, that being said, to my main point, those issues are long-term things. I mean, to hire more BIPOC teachers is big. But I was going to say that area where used to be part of Atkinson, that is now part of Arleta and Marysville, I mean, that's a very kind of low SES area. And I think there was some benefit in F series that have that be part of Atkinson to kind of have a more diverse SES. But the problem is that we now bump into the if you want to increase Arleta,